Hello, folks. For 12 years, everyone believed the missing boy drowned in that mountain creek. His sister followed a strange trail of clues and found something impossible waiting for her. Let's dive in.
A Bigfoot family raised my brother for 12 years, and when I finally found him in October of 2001, he was standing in a creek in Webster County, West Virginia, 27 years old, alive, healthy, and happy, with a gray giant, near 9 feet tall, watching over him from the timber, like a father watches a son. Toby was 15 when he vanished from our mountain in October of 1989. 300 people searched for him. The state police dragged the river. The county held a memorial over an empty casket, and my mother kept his bedroom exactly as he left it for 12 years because she never believed he was dead. She was right. Everybody else was wrong. The deputies, the trackers, the newspapers, the neighbors who whispered that the mountain took him. The mountain saved my brother, or the family that lives on it did, and I have kept their secret for 25 years. I'm 58 now, and the ones this silence protected have let me know it's time, so I'm going to tell you the whole story, from the morning he walked up that hollow to the morning he walked back out of it. If you're enjoying these stories, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new one, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I read every one, and it means more than you know. My name is Brenda Sturgill, and I was born in March of 1968 in a 4-room house on a bench above the back fork of Elk River, a few miles up from the little coal town of Burgoo. I'm going to change a couple of small things about roads and hollow names before this is over, and I'll tell you plainly when I do it, because there are lives up that drainage that depend on nobody finding what I found. Everything else is exactly true. My daddy was Delmer Sturgill, and he drove a log truck for an outfit out of Cowan for 30 years. My mother was Mildred, and she cooked at the school in Webster Springs until her knees gave out. We raised a garden, kept 2 hogs and a milk cow, and heated with wood my whole childhood. And if that sounds poor to you, it never once felt poor to us. Toby came along in July of 1974, 6 years behind me, and from the time that child could walk, he belonged to the woods more than he belonged to the house. He wasn't wild and he wasn't strange. He was quiet, is all. Quiet in a settled way that made grown men take him seriously by the time he was 10. Daddy taught him to hunt squirrels and read sign, and old Hobart Ratliff, who lived alone in the next hollow and had dug ginseng on that mountain since before the war, taught him everything else. Where the seng grew and where it only pretended to grow. Which coves held mast in a bad year. How to walk so the woods forgot you were in them. By 15, Toby could go up that mountain at daylight and come down at dark with more roots in his sack than men 3 times his age, and Mama banked his seng money in a coffee can over the stove for his schooling. You need the shape of that country in your mind. Webster County in the 1980s was timber and coal and church. 1 stoplight worth of towns, strung down the river valleys, and everything above them standing on end. The mountains there aren't tall the manner Western mountains are tall, but they are steep past all reason and folded tight, hollow after hollow, laurel hells a man can crawl into and never find the far side of, and whole benches of woods that no road has ever touched because there was never money in touching them. We had party lines till I was grown, and hollows where the school bus couldn't turn, and we had, though I'd have laughed at you for saying it then, more room for a hidden life in one county than most states have altogether. Ask how anything stays unknown in America, and I'd answer, you've never walked a Webster County laurel hell in the rain. I want you to see him the morning he left, because I have seen him every day since. Saturday, the 14th of October, 1989. I was 21, home from Elkins for the weekend, asleep on the couch when he came through the front room before daylight. He had Daddy's old canvas coat on over a flannel shirt, his mattock over his shoulder, a feed sack folded through his belt, and 2 of Mama's molasses cookies in his coat pocket, because he never went up the mountain without them. He stopped at the door and looked back at me. and he grinned that gap grin of his and told me to save him some supper. Then the screen door clapped shut, and my brother walked up the hollow into the fog, and he was gone 12 years. The rain started about noon. You have to understand what rain does in that country. The Back Fork drainage falls hard and fast, and the little branches that feed it can rise from ankle deep to waist deep in an hour when a cold front stalls on the mountain. That one stalled. By 4 in the afternoon, it had put down better than 3 inches, and the branch behind our house was running brown and loud, and Toby wasn't home. Come 6, Daddy had his slicker on and his flashlight in his hand and was gone up the hollow with our neighbor Troy Cutlip. By 9, they were back, soaked through and gray in the face, and Daddy told Mama to call the sheriff's office in Webster Springs. I have never forgotten how careful his voice was when he spoke it, like a man carrying a full bucket up icy steps. The search that followed was the biggest that county had seen in my lifetime. Deputies, state police, Forest Service men, mine rescue crews, dog handlers from Charleston, and hundreds of ordinary people in wet wool walking grid lines through laurel so thick you had to crawl it. They searched 16 days. On the 3rd day, a tracker found Toby's mattock and his feed sack with 11 fresh seng roots in it, sitting on a bench nearly 4 miles up the drainage, high above where anybody thought a boy would go. On the 5th day, a fireman from Richwood pulled one of Toby's boots out of a logjam almost 2 miles below that bench, laces still tied. The water between those 2 points had been a torrent when he was in it. The men looked at the mattock and the boot and the flood line on the trees, and they drew the only conclusion the evidence allowed. I walked those grid lines myself for 14 of those 16 days, and I heard the moment the search changed from finding Toby to finding Toby's body. Nobody announced it. It moved through the crews like a change in the weather, a lowering of voices, a slowness in how men looked at the creek. On the 17th morning, the sheriff came to our house, stood on the porch with his hat in his hands, and told my parents that the search was suspended. Suspended was the kind word. Everybody on that porch knew the county had just told us our boy was dead in the water somewhere, wedged under a rock or buried in gravel, and that the spring rises would either give him back or keep him. Daddy aged 10 years that winter. He went back to the log truck, because a man has to work, but the sound went out of him. He quit singing in the cab, quit telling his stories at supper, and started sitting on the porch after dark, staring up the hollow like a man waiting on headlights. Mama went the other direction. She ironed Toby's shirts and put them back in his drawer. She kept his school books stacked on his desk and his .22 on the pegs over his bed, and every Sunday after church she baked molasses cookies, and if you asked her why, she'd look at you level and easy and tell you Toby would want some when he came home. People in town claimed grief had turned her mind. I'm here to tell you my mother was the only sane one among us, because here's what my mother knew that the rest of us were too broke down to notice. They never found him. 16 days, hundreds of searchers, dogs, divers, a helicopter out of Clarksburg, and that river gave up one boot. No coat, no body, no bones. Not that fall, not the next spring, not ever. The elk in that stretch is no Mississippi. It's a mountain river you can wade most of the year, and it gives back what it takes, always has, and every riverman in the county knew it, and none would say so out loud that winter. A boot with the laces still tied tells you a boot came off a foot in fast water. It tells you nothing at all about where the foot went afterward. The county held a memorial the following November, a year and a month after, because Mama refused it sooner and only bent then for Daddy's sake, for the man was hollowing out in front of her. The church in Burgoo was full past the doors, and they set a casket up front with Toby's school picture on it, and the casket was empty, and every soul in that building knew it was empty, and I never felt a room so heavy with a thing nobody would say. My mother sat the whole service with her spine straight and her hands folded, dry-eyed, polite as company, and afterward, on the church steps, a well-meaning woman took her hands and told her that at least now she'd have some closure, and Mildred Sturgill looked at her steady and answered that you can't close a door on an empty room, and got in the truck. They quit pressing her after that. The county settled on its story, and our family kept 2 stories under one roof, and time went on the manner it does, without asking anybody's leave. And there was one more thing besides, a thing that got itself wrote down in a deputy's notebook, and then quietly left out of every account after, because it fit nothing and helped nobody. On the 4th day of the search, a dog handler working the bench where the mattock was found refused to take her dogs past a rock overhang at the head of a little side drawer. Not the dogs, her. She stood there white as paper and called her animals in, and the dogs came gladly, tails down, and she told the deputy there was a smell up that drawer that no bear ever made, and she'd worked bear country 19 years. I heard about the dog handler from the deputy himself, a young fellow named Mabry, at the volunteer fire department fish fry a full year later, after he'd had enough beer to loosen what the department had asked him to tighten. He told me the handler wasn't the only one. 2 mine rescue men working a ridge above the overhang on day 6 had heard knocking, loud, even, spaced knocking, wood on wood, answering itself across the drainage, and had wrote it down as other search teams signaling, except the coordinator's log showed no team within 2 miles of that ridge. And a state policeman had photographed a barefoot print in a seep near the head of the drawer, 17 inches heel to toe, and the print had gone to Charleston in an envelope and had never come back, and nobody in Charleston would say they'd ever received it. I did nothing with any of that for almost 3 years, and I want to be honest about why. It wasn't doubt, it was fear of hope. Hope is a dangerous animal to let in the house when your family is barely standing. If I let myself believe there was a mystery on that mountain, instead of a drowning, then Toby was out there cold and alone all that time, and we had quit on him, and I couldn't carry that, so I carried nothing. I finished my certificate in Elkins, came home, took the bookkeeping job at the lumber yard in Cowan, and in June of 1991, I married Arvil Kogar, a lineman for the power company and the steadiest man God ever built, and we set up housekeeping 2 miles from my folks. Our daughter May was born in April of 1993, and my mother held that baby and wept, and told her, first thing, all about her Uncle Toby. What broke my silence was Hobart Ratliff. In September of 1992, the old man took a stroke, and I sat with him some evenings that fall, because his people were scattered and mine weren't. One night, with the stove ticking and the rain on his tin roof, he asked me out of a clear silence whether they'd ever searched past the overhang at the head of what I'll call Buckhorn Draw, which isn't its name. I told him about the dog handler. He nodded like a man hearing a bill come due. Then he told me that in 50 years of digging that mountain, he had never once dug past that overhang, and his daddy hadn't before him, and it wasn't superstition, and it wasn't laziness. It was an arrangement. There were folks, he told me, up that draw, that was his word, folks that had been there longer than the Ratliffs, or the Sturgills, or the coal company, or the state of West Virginia, and the arrangement was simple. You stayed out of the head of the draw, and whatever went wrong for you on that mountain had a habit of going right. I asked him what he meant by going right, and he told me about the winter of 1960, when he broke his leg on the ice 3 miles up, and crawled until dark, and woke at daylight on his own porch, with no memory of the last 2 miles, and drag marks in the snow, too wide for any sled. He told me about hemlock boughs he'd find stacked over his seng patches before hard freezes, keeping the ground soft. He told me that twice in his life he had seen one of them plain, once in 1946 and once in 1971, both times at dusk, both times at a distance, upright, dark, taller than any man, and both times it had looked at him the same unbothered manner a farmer looks at a neighbor's truck going by on the road. Then he took my wrist in his good hand, and he told me that if any soul on that mountain knew what happened to my brother, it was them, and that nobody had ever asked them, because nobody knew how, and the ones searching had been too loud to be answered. Hobart died that December, and I buried what he told me alongside him for one more winter. And then, in October of 1993, on the 4th anniversary, I couldn't stand it anymore. I told Arville I was going up to leave flowers where they found the mattock. That part was true. I just also packed a dozen of Mama's molasses cookies in a lard bucket, and when I got to that bench, 4 miles up and half a lifetime from the road, I set the bucket on a flat rock below the overhang, and I stood in that enormous green quiet, and I felt like a fool, and I hollered up the drawer anyway. I hollered that I was Toby Sturgill's sister, that we never quit loving him, and that if anybody up there knew where my brother was, I'd come every year to this rock until I died. Nothing answered but the creek. I cried a while, and I walked out, and I told myself that was the end of it. The bucket was what brought me back. I went up in April when the trails dried, meaning only to fetch it, and the bucket was sitting on the flat rock where I'd left it, empty, clean, with the lid set back on. Under the lid, laid crossways on the bottom, was a stem of dogtooth violet, wilted maybe 2 days. Now you can tell me a coon opened a pressed lid and shut it after itself, and you can tell me the flower fell 4 feet sideways under a closed lid, and I'll listen politely, because I told myself all of it on the walk down, in the exact order you would. Halfway home, I quit arguing. Somebody had taken those cookies, and somebody had put that lid back on to keep the bucket dry for me, and somebody had wanted me to know the difference between taken and stolen. Right there in the middle of that trail, I sat down on a log, and I laughed and cried at the same time until my ribs hurt. After that, I went up every October and every April, and I never told a living soul, not Arville, not Mama, nobody, because the second thing Hobart had told me that night was that the arrangement only held as long as it stayed small. I kept it small. I carried cookies, apples, a jar of honey once, and the honey was the first time I got an answer that couldn't be argued with. It was October of 1995, and when I came to the rock, the spring before's gifts were long gone, as usual, but laid out on the stone, in a neat row, sorted small to large, were 7 buckeyes and a piece of shale with a fern fossil in it, as clear as a photograph. Toby had collected fern fossils from the time he was 7. There was a cigar box of them still sitting on his desk at home. I stood at that rock holding a rock, and for the first time in 6 years, I let the dangerous animal in the house. I let myself hope my brother was alive. I need to stop here and tell you about Daddy, because the mountain wasn't done costing us. Delmer Sturgill worked his log truck right up until the 14th of December, 1996, when his heart quit in the yard at the mill in Cowan, between one load and the next, and the men swore he was gone before he reached the ground. He was 55. At the funeral home, I stood at his casket and made him a promise I had no earthly business making, that I would find his boy. And I have carried one comfort about that day ever since, because on the morning we buried my father, something stood on the ridge above the cemetery at Bergu in the sleet, back in the timber, where only somebody looking for it would see it. And I was looking. It was there through the whole graveside service, still as a chimney, and when the last car pulled out, it was gone. I never told Mama. I believed I knew who'd come to pay respects, and I believed it meant somebody up that mountain knew exactly whose father Delmer Sturgill was. The signs kept building through the late 90s, patient and slow, like whoever was leaving them was teaching me at the only speed trust can be taught. In 97, the knocking answered me. I had read enough by then, quiet library trips to Charleston, old newspaper accounts, a worn paperback about the Fuchs scares, to know that people who claim these encounters talk about wood knocks, so I carried a hatchet handle up that October and struck a beech trunk twice and felt like a crazy woman. 10 seconds later, from up the drawer, 2 knocks came back, so loud and so even that a grouse flushed off the bench. I knocked 3 times. 3 came back. The third answer came quicker than the second, like whoever held the club on the far end was enjoying it as much as I was, and my arms had gone to goosebumps inside my coat sleeves. I sat down right where I stood, because my legs had opinions of their own. And from somewhere above the overhang came a low sound I'd never heard in a life spent in those woods. A long, rolling hum, almost like a man singing to himself 2 ridges away. And the strangest part is, it wasn't frightening. It settled me the same as rain on a tin roof settles you. I sat on that wet bench and listened to it like it was church. In '98 came the gift that told me minds were meeting mine. I'd left a red bandana that October, tied around a jar of apple butter, because red was Toby's color. He'd worn a red bowl cap so constant that Mama accused him of sleeping in it. In April, the jar was gone and folded on the rock. Folded, not dropped, corner to corner like a flag, was the bandana, and set on top of it was a whistle whittled from elderberry stalk, the pith pushed clean out, a notch cut true, and it blew a clear note when I tried it. Hobart had taught Toby to make elderberry whistles when he was 9. I must have made 100 summer afternoons loud with the things. Whoever whittled that whistle had a knife, and patience and human hands, or hands taught by human hands. And I drove home that evening with it, on the seat beside me, and had to pull over twice, because I couldn't see the road for crying. I have to tell you what those years did to me on the inside, because it wasn't all wonder. It was a splitting. Down at the house, I was Brenda Koger, wife, mother, bookkeeper, the woman who ran the concession stand at May's ball games. Up on the mountain, twice a year, I was somebody else entirely, a woman conducting a correspondence with beings the whole world says are a campfire story, and I could never speak of it. I'd sit in church of a Sunday and hear the preacher on faith being the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And I'd think, preacher, I have got evidence in my cedar chest, a whistle and a fossil and 7 buckeyes, and no court in this land would call it more than trash off a rock. That's the loneliest kind of knowing there is, when the truth you carry has no place to be set down. Mama was the one person I came close to telling, 100 times. She was slowing down by then, sugar in her blood and her knees full of gravel, but her mind stayed sharp as a briar, and her certainty about Toby never wavered 1 inch in 10 years. She still baked the cookies. I'd taken over carrying them without her knowing what I carried them to, and there was a deceit in that which sat crooked on me every single time, taking my mother's cookies for her lost son and letting her believe they went to the church bake sale. But Hobart's words stayed with me. Keep it small. A secret split between 2 hearts is twice as loud, and my mother could no more have kept off that mountain than she could have quit breathing, and her knees would have killed her trying. So I carried it alone, and I'm not sorry, and it cost me, and both of those things are true. The autumn of 2000 I saw them. Not him, them. I had stayed too late at the rock, waiting on knocks that didn't come, and the light was going when I started down. And you know how dusk pools in those deep coves, like water filling a basin. At the second creek crossing, I stopped to get my footing, and movement up the far slope caught my eye, and I looked up, and 2 upright figures were crossing an open stand of hardwoods, maybe 80 yards above me, moving with the grade, not hurrying. The front one was enormous, dark, wide as a chimney through the shoulders. The second was smaller, lighter colored, hanging back the manner a half-grown youngster hangs back behind a parent. Neither one looked at me, and both of them knew I was there. I'd bet my life on it, because the big one shifted just enough to stay between me and the young one the whole time they were in sight. Then the timber took them, and the cove was empty, and I stood in the creek with my heart going like a pheasant flushing, and one thought running circles. They let me see that. After 7 years of buckets and knocks, they had let me see. 80 yards, open hardwoods, good light going but light yet, and no tree trunk on this earth walks uphill. I never spoke of it, even at home. Some things you carry back in both hands and set on a shelf inside yourself, and you visit them, and that site has been visited more than any other shelf I keep. 7 years of smoke, and I'd finally seen the household. I should set down here the one time the secret nearly got loose on its own. because it taught me what we were up against. In the fall of '99, 2 bear hunters out of Nicholas County lost their dogs up the next drainage over, and the dogs came back at midnight to the truck, all 4, silent, and wouldn't leave the tailgate. And one of those men stood in the lumberyard office that Monday, telling anybody about the smell on the ridge and the scream that answered his call box. I kept my head down over the ledgers. What saved it was laughter. The yard men rode that poor fellow so hard about his squalling haint that by Friday he'd quit telling it, and by deer season he was telling it on himself. A funny story now, defanged. I understood that week that the family's best fence has never been the laurel. It's ridicule. The country folks who know better hush, and the ones who talk get laughed quiet, and the mountain keeps its own. That winter, I did something I'd put off for 11 years. I went through the case file. Deputy Mabry had made sergeant by then, and when I asked to see the file on my brother, he pulled it and sat with me in a back room of the courthouse in Webster Springs and let me read every page. But there was one report I'd never heard breathed, written by a Forest Service man on the 9th day, and it stated plainly that a food cache had gone missing from the search base camp overnight. 40 pounds and more of it, bread, canned meat, a case of pork and beans, and that the ground was too churned by boots to track, and one intact print at the edge of the mud had been, and this is the report's own word, inconclusive. Inconclusive is a fine word. It stretches to cover whatever a man can't afford to conclude. Then I asked Mabry what he made of it, and he looked at that page a long while, and then he told me that on this mountain there were 2 kinds of lawmen, the ones who'd heard the knocking that week, and the ones who lied about it. So understand what I carried up the hollow on the 12-year anniversary, the 13th of October, 2001. I carried cookies and apples. I carried Toby's red ball cap, which I'd taken off his bedpost with a story to Mama about wanting it near me, and that story was true. And I carried a knowing 8 years in the assembling, slow as a river builds a gravel bar. They were real, up that draw, close as breathing. They knew who I was and who my people were, and they had been kind to me, by every means available to beings that couldn't walk up on my porch and say the words. What I still couldn't let myself carry in daylight was the last step of it, the step my mother had never once needed proof for. That morning was cold and bright, after 2 days of hard rain, the leaves at full color, the creek up and talking, and I remember thinking, Lord, it's the same weather. The mountain looked exactly like it looked the morning it took him. It turned out that mattered, and I'll tell you why directly. I got to the flat rock at mid-morning, and everything was wrong, or everything was different, which up there amounted to the same jolt. There were tracks, not a print in a seep you had to squint at. Tracks, plural, pressed deep in the rain-soft ground all around my rock. One set giant, better than 17 inches, one set middling, and one set that stopped my breath in my chest, because it was a bare human foot, long and narrow, high-arched, with the toes spread wide, the manner of a foot that's never known a boot, and it was the size a grown man's foot. The 3 sets came down off the draw together, circled the rock together, and went back up together, and pressed into the moss on top of the rock itself. Square in the middle, where I couldn't miss it, was a single hemlock sprig, laid crossways, green that morning, fresh. They'd been standing where I was standing while I was eating my breakfast down at the truck. I want to be careful here, because this next part is the part I've turned over most in 25 years, and I still believe I read it right. That hemlock sprig was the same signal as the violet in the bucket 8 years before. It was a message in the only alphabet we shared, and the tracks were the rest of the sentence. Every other year, they came to the rock by night and left before I ever started up. This year, they'd come in daylight, 3 of them, one barefoot and human-shaped, and they'd left me a fresh green marker and a trail a blind woman could follow. Pressed deep in ground, the rain had made perfect for pressing. Hobart's arrangement was, you don't go past the overhang. Standing at that rock with my brother's ball cap in my coat pocket, I understood, clear as a bell ringing in cold air, that the arrangement had just been amended. I was being invited. I won't pretend I marched up that drawer like a soldier. For a long spell I stood there, arguing with my own feet. I thought about Arville and May down at the house, that May was 8 and needed her mother, that nobody on this earth knew where I was, that I'd told the oldest lie in the county ledger, just going up to tend the memorial. I thought about the dog handler who wouldn't take her animals past the overhang, and how she'd worked bear country 19 years, and what it takes to scare a woman like that. And then I thought about my mother ironing a dead boy's shirts for 12 years because her heart outstubborned the whole state of West Virginia, and I thought, Brenda, if you walk down off this bench, you will be walking down for the rest of your life. So I ate one of Mama's cookies for courage, and I'm not ashamed to say it, and I put Toby's cap on my own head, and I stepped past the flat rock and started up Buckhorn Draw behind 3 sets of tracks. Past the overhang, the country changed. I don't mean it turned strange, I mean it turned old. The draw pinched down to a rock-walled slot where the creek came down in steps, and then it opened, and I came up over a lip of stone into a hanging cove that no map I have ever seen admits to. A bowl of maybe 40 acres hung on the side of that mountain like a swallow's nest, ringed in cliffs, floored in hemlock and yellow birch so big that 4 of me couldn't have joined hands around the biggest trunks. No logger ever got up there. The slot was too narrow to skid timber down, and the cliffs turned back everything else. And so that cove was standing exactly as it stood when the first Sturgill walked into Webster County, and the light came down through those crowns, green and broken, and the air had a smell under the leaf rot, musky and warm and animal and old, and I knew that smell the same instant I met it, because a dog handler had tried to describe it to a deputy 12 years before. The tracks led along the creek to the head of the cove, and I followed them slow, making noise on purpose, talking out loud about who I was and what I carried, feeling watched from every laurel thicket, and I was. And at the head of the cove, where the creek spread shallow over a wide apron of bedrock, I saw the shelters. 2 of them, woven of whole saplings bent and locked together, walls of stacked hemlock boughs shingled like a roof, each one big enough to stable a horse, tucked back under the cliff, where the rock threw the weather off. Between them, a slab of stone the size of a kitchen table, swept clean, with hickory nuts drying on it in the sun, sorted in piles. Sorted, I stood at the edge of that clearing with my heart slamming, and my eyes going from the shelters to the nuts to the fish weir. There was a fish weir in the creek, stones set in a V neat as a book drawing, and my mind kept reaching for the word camp and flinching off of it, because a camp is a thing people make. Then the man in the creek stood up. He'd been crouched at the weir with his back to me, still as the stones, and he rose up out of that stillness in one easy motion, and he was tall and lean and brown as a saddle, with dark hair past his shoulders and a beard, dressed in hides sewn with sinew, barefoot on wet rock in October like it was August grass. And I did what you'd do. I froze solid, because a wild man in the deep woods is its own kind of fright. He turned around. 60 feet of creek and 12 years stood between us, and I looked at that bearded stranger's face, and the cove tilted under me, because I was looking at my father's jaw and my mother's straight nose, and under the beard and the weather and the years, I was looking at the gap grin that had told me to save him some supper. The red cap was still on my head. His eyes went to it and came back to my face, and his mouth moved, rusty and slow, shaping a word he hadn't used on another living soul in 12 years. Sissy. He called me what he'd called me when he was 4 years old. My knees quit being load-bearing about then, and I sat straight down on the creek bank in the wet leaves, which is the honest record of how I greeted my brother after 12 years, sitting in the mud with both hands over my mouth. And then the timber behind him moved, and it kept moving, and out of the hemlock shade at the head of that cove stepped a giant. I will describe him now the same manner I have described him to myself every night since, carefully, because he has earned better than a monster's description. He stood better than 8.5 feet, and I've had years of a known tree to measure him against. He was built like a river bluff, wide at the shoulder past any doorway, deep through the chest, arms hanging easy with hands that could have circled my waist, and every inch of him under a coat of hair, the color of charcoal, gone grey at the edges, silvered full white across the crown and down the center of his chest. His face was bare-skinned around the eyes and cheekbones, dark as walnut hull, heavy-browed, wide-nosed and old. That's what took me hardest, not the size, the age. There were lines cut around those eyes deep as the lines in Hobart Ratliff's face the winter he died, and the eyes themselves were dark and wet and shining, and no animal on this continent carries eyes like those, because they were doing what mine were doing, weighing and asking. They came to rest on me and stayed, patient and level and grave. And beside the creek my brother stood between us, with the water moving around his ankles. And nobody in that cove breathed, and that is where I have to stop for a breath myself, because what happened in the next minute decided everything that came after. Toby came out of the creek to me. He came slow as you'd approach a spooked horse, and I understood later he was doing it for the ones behind him too, showing every party in that cove that this was safe, this was chosen. An arm's length off he stopped, and up close the boy was inside the man everywhere, under the scar splitting his left eyebrow that hadn't been there before, and the hands were calloused into leather, one finger crooked from a break that had healed on its own. Neither of us managed words. I put my arms around my brother, and he smelled of wood smoke and creek water and hemlock and that deep, warm musk, and he was solid and alive, and his heart was banging against mine. And behind us, the giant made a sound. Low, rolling, two soft notes falling, the gentlest sound I ever heard come out of anything that size, and Toby laughed, wet and cracked, and got out that it was all right, that the old man was telling the others it was all right. The others. I looked past him and counted what the shade allowed. There were 4. We sat on the bedrock apron by the weir the rest of that day, and my brother gave me 12 years in pieces, in a voice that ran smooth for a sentence and then rusted shut and had to be worked open again, English coming back to him in front of me, like feeling into a numb limb. I'm going to give it to you in order, though it didn't come in order. It came the manner. Floodwater gives back what it took. A piece here, a piece there, some of it never. He remembered the rain catching him on the far bench with his sack full. Knowing better, he tried the crossing anyway, because supper was on, and his sister was home, and the branch taking his feet at the second step, and the world turning to cold brown thunder. He remembered his boot wedging in rock, under water, and wrenching loose from it, and going down the flume of that draw backward, and fetching up against a sycamore root wad, half drowned with his left leg, broke below the knee. He remembers crawling into the root hollow out of the current, and the cold coming up into him, and knowing plainly, at 15 in the falling dark, that he was going to die on the mountain he loved. And he remembers, and his voice went to almost nothing telling it, the root wad moving, being lifted off it, out of the water, up into the air, and against a warmth like the front of a wood stove, and looking up through the rain, at a face looking down at him. He told me he wasn't afraid. His afraid, he told me, was all used up on the water, with none left over for the face, and the face carried him up out of the flood, and that's the last he remembers of being Toby Sturgill, boy of this county. He woke in the cove, in the shelter that stands there yet, on a bed of dry grass and boughs, out of his soaked clothes and packed round with dry moss, with his broke leg bound between 2 split staves of hickory, bound, lashed with strips of inner bark, set straight and true, and the old grey giant sitting in the shelter mouth between him and the weather. For some days he can't count. He was fevered. He remembers being lifted like a baby to drink at a gourd. He remembers chewed root pulp, bitter as quinine, pressed into his mouth, and being made to swallow with a gentleness that wouldn't take no. He remembers the female, browner and smaller than the old man, bringing coals cupped in wet bark from only she knew where, and a fire kept banked at the shelter mouth, for him. Toby told me that was the piece that undid him whenever the fever let him think, because they didn't use fire for themselves, not once in 12 years, but they knew the naked child of the creatures down the mountain would die without it, and they knew how to keep one alive, and you may sit with what that means about how long they have been watching us, because I have sat with it for 25 years. He never learned where the coals came from, and in 12 years he never once saw a fire of their own making, and that fact alone would keep a scientist up nights. The leg knit crooked enough to end the question of walking out before spring, and by spring, he told me, the question itself had changed shape. Understand what his winter was. A boy with a fever dream for company, mending in a bark shelter through a Webster County January, and the family. It was the old man, the female he came to think of as the old man's mate, and their young one, a male youngster he guessed at 8 or 9 years in growth, though he learned later their years don't map to ours. That family fed him from their own stores. Hickory nuts by the double handful, dried service berries, trout from under the creek ice, roots he never learned the daylight names of. The young one, who Toby came to call brother in his own head long before he could admit it, took to him the first week, sat by him whole afternoons, brought him treasures, a crow feather, a napped flake of chert, a fern fossil in a piece of shale. You heard me. The fossils on my flat rock came from a collection, same as the ones in the cigar box on his desk at home. And when Toby saw where brother kept his, tucked in a dry crevice, sorted by size, he laughed until he cried, and the whole family gathered round to watch him do it, and he reckoned that was the first time he heard the old man make the 2-note falling sound, and he came to learn it meant the same as a man saying, "Well, all right then." You'll want to know why he stayed, and I asked it that first day on the bedrock, and I asked it hard, because I had 12 years of my mother's face stored up behind the asking. He didn't flinch from it. By the thaw, he told me, he could hobble, and by May he could walk, and in June of 1990, 7 months gone, he stood at the top of the slot with the whole green world below him, and the old man stood beside him and made no move to stop him, then or ever. And I want that plain on the record. They never kept my brother 1 hour against his will, and he looked down toward the roofs of Burgoo, and he couldn't go. Not wouldn't, couldn't, he said, the manner a man can't step off a cliff, because he had done the arithmetic a 15-year-old does with the whole solemn weight of 15, and it came out the same every time he ran it. He walks down that mountain, and he is a resurrection for a week and a 9 days wonder for a year, and every question ends the same place. Where were you? Who kept you alive? Show us. He knew what was standing behind him in that timber, and he knew what the world does with what it can't leave be, and he'd had 7 months of hearing helicopters and seeing, twice, men with rifles moving through the low country in lines. He told me, "Sissy, I was the only thing on this earth that could point at them. The only one. As long as I stayed lost, they stayed found." My mouth was open to argue, and the argument was ready, that we were his blood, that Mama ironed his shirts, that Daddy died looking up this hollow, and my brother watched the argument load up in my face, and he took my hand, and he gave me the thing that spilled it. "I know about Daddy," he told me. "I was on the ridge above the cemetery in the sleet, him and the old man both, because the old man had walked him down there, 13 miles of ridgeline in December, when the word moved up the mountain, as word does. My brother stood in the timber above his father's funeral, 22 years old, and sang the hymns under his breath, and the old man stood beside him, with a hand spread flat between his shoulder blades the whole service, and then they walked home in the dark. He'd seen me looking up. He told me the hardest work of his life was standing still while his sister looked right at him, and I've thought near daily since about that sleet morning, 20 yards of laurel between us and the whole width of the world. And here's the part I didn't understand until he showed me, the part that finished whatever was left in me. He led me up under the cliff to a dry crevice beside Brother's fossils, and he brought out a bundle wrapped in deer hide and unwrapped it, careful as scripture, and inside were the things I'd carried up that mountain for 8 years. The red bandana, the bucket lid, mended with pine pitch where it had cracked. Every note, because from 96 on I'd taken to leaving notes under the jars, news and weather and May's height, penciled onto butcher paper, and I'd never once known if they meant anything, and here they were, soft as cloth from handling, and my brother had read every one 100 times by creek light. The cookies, he told me, were always his, that the old man carried them up the drawer and set them in front of him and stood back. Twice a year, 12 years, he said, that's how I knew Mama was alive, long as the cookies came, and there I had to walk off to the creek a while, and no more needs telling about that. The light was failing when the old man came to the bedrock. All day he had held off at the edge of things, letting us have it, and now he came across the apron with that rolling, unhurried walk, and my brother stood, so I stood, and the ground itself had opinions about each step he took. He stopped 1 pace off and looked down at me, and I am on record here as a level-headed woman, so believe me, being looked at by him is an event. Nothing in a life on that mountain prepares you for it. It isn't like being looked at by a bear, which is all threat assessment, and it isn't like being looked at by a man. It's slower than both and deeper than both. He looked at me until he was done. However long that was, time had quit keeping honest books by then, and then he reached out one hand, a hand the size of a dinner platter, and with the back of one finger, gentle as you'd touch a soap bubble, he touched the bill of the red ball cap on my head. Just that. Then he made the 2 soft falling notes. Well, all right then. And Toby beside me let out a breath. And that is the whole of my formal introduction to the head of the family that raised my brother, and it was enough. And it remains the highest honor ever paid me, and I include my wedding day in the accounting, and Arville agrees. I stayed that night. There was no question of making the road by dark, and there was no question in me of leaving, and I'll own that I let Arville pass one terrible night, believing I was stranded by a washout, and it's the one lie of my marriage, and it stands. I slept in Toby's shelter under a bearskin, with my brother talking low beside me the whole night through, neither of us willing to spend a minute of it asleep. And sometime past the middle of the night, out in the dark of the cove, the old man began the long rolling hum I'd heard once from below the overhang, and the female's voice came in under it. Lower, and the 2 sounds moved around each other slow as smoke, and Toby's voice stopped, and then he told me quiet that they did that some nights, and that the first winter, fevered and half froze and orphaned by the living world, he would hang on to that sound in the dark like a rope, and follow it hand over hand down into sleep. I lay under a bearskin on a mountain in West Virginia and listened to giants singing, and I thought, my brother didn't fall out of the world, he fell into a deeper room of it. Toward dawn I finally drifted, and I woke to grey light and the smell of trout broiling on a flat stone over a palm-sized fire my brother had built for my benefit alone, and the young one, brother, sitting a polite 10 feet off, studying me the whole time I ate, and when I smiled at him, he ducked his whole head like a bashful child at a church dinner, all 400 pounds of him, and that was the morning I quit being afraid of anything on that mountain for the rest of my life. Morning brought the reckoning we'd both been holding off, which was Mama. I told him plain, our mother was 66, sugar sick, bad knees, and the one thing that had kept her spine straight through 12 years was a certainty the whole county called crazy, and she deserved to know she'd been right before she died. Toby heard it looking at the creek, and I watched 12 years of arithmetic run behind his eyes one more time, and I could see the sums fighting, because every person added to the secret was risk laid on the family, and this person couldn't climb to the cove, and he couldn't walk into Burgoo. It was the old man who settled it, and I will never stop turning over how. He'd been at the weir, and he came and crouched at the apron edge, and Toby turned and, there's no other honest words for this, they talked. Toby's part was low English and hand signs. The old man's part was small sounds and a stillness that changed textures, and after a spell the old man rose and looked down the drawer, the direction of the flat rock, the direction of the world, and made a short single note, and Toby turned to me with his eyes brimming, and told me the old man would carry the meeting to the overhang, halfway. The family's country would open one seam one day for one old woman, because she was his mother, and the old man had a mother's memory too. That's what my brother said. He had a mother's memory too. We built it slow and careful over the following June, and I'm going to change some operational things here on purpose, and you'll forgive me. What matters is this. On a warm, still Tuesday in July of 2002, I drove my mother up the forest road in Arville's truck with a picnic and a story about visiting the Memorial Rock, and I walked her the last stretch on a path Toby had spent a month clearing. Smooth, gentle switchbacks, handholds lashed to trees, my brother building his mother a road, the only manor left to him, and we came to the overhang with her breath short and her eyes already working the shade up the drawer, because my mother could read me like a seed catalogue and knew this was no picnic. There was a chestnut log bench there that hadn't existed in October, drawn up in the shade, and I sat my mother down on it, and I said, "Mama, I have to tell you something," and I got 6 words further, and Mildred Sturgill, 67 years old, put her hand on my arm and stopped me, and looked past me up the drawer, at the man shape coming down through the sun and shade with its gap grin working, and my mother stood up off that bench with no help from her knees for the first time in a decade and said, "Took you long enough," and opened her arms. She never once fainted, never once questioned, never once cried out. She'd spent 12 years ready. It was the rest of us that had needed the decade to catch up. They had 4 hours on that bench, and I sat off a ways on a rock and let them have it, and most of it isn't mine to tell. But 2 pieces are. The first is that partway through the afternoon, Mama took his hands, turned them over, read the calluses and the crooked finger like a page, and asked him one question loud enough for me to hear. "Was somebody good to you?" And Toby looked up the drawer, and Toby whistled, 2 soft falling notes, and the timber above the overhang, which had been empty timber all afternoon to my eyes, and I'd have sworn to it, moved, and the old man stepped his head and shoulders clear of the hemlock shade into plain view, 40 feet above us, silver crown catching the sun, and looked down at my mother. And my mother looked up at what looked down, and the 2 of them held still a long, long moment, mother and keeper, and then Mildred Sturgill pressed her hand flat over her own heart and bowed her head to him, and the old man watched her do it and pressed his hand, that platter of a hand, flat over his, and my mother turned back to her son with her face shining and said, "Well, now I've met your other family," like he'd married into a household 2 hollows over. That was my mother entire, and if you want to know how I got through what came later, it's that picture. I can close my eyes on any bad day yet and see her bowing to him in the July light. The second piece is the cookies. Before we left, she took the tin from the picnic basket, molasses cookies baked that morning, and she wouldn't hand them to Toby. She walked, on my arm, to the base of the slope, and she set the tin on a stone, and she called up into the timber, the same voice that used to fetch us off the mountain at supper, that these were for the young one and for his mother, and that she was sorry she had nothing better to give the people who gave her back her son, but nobody had ever gone away from Mildred Sturgill's kitchen hungry, and she wasn't about to start with them. Then she got in the truck. Toby stood at the overhang till we were out of sight, and my mother watched him in the side mirror the whole switchback down, and she didn't speak till the hard top, and then all she said was, "Don't you tell your brother, but that big one favors my grandpa Sturgill about the eyes." I laughed so hard I near put us in the ditch. She had 3 more meetings at that bench, 1 each summer, and I have 4 photographs from those afternoons that no soul will ever see, and they're in the cedar chest, and when I'm gone, May has her instructions. The one I look at most is the one where they're both laughing, my mother and my brother, laughing with their whole shoulders at some joke I never got to hear. Mama died the 9th of May, 2005, at home, in her sleep, easy, with Toby's whistle from the flat rock under her pillow, where it had lived since I finally confessed the whole 8 years of buckets and knocks to her, and she'd absolved me with one sentence, saying I'd carried it right, small and quiet, same as she'd have done. 2 mornings after we buried her beside Daddy at Burgoo, I drove up before daylight and climbed to the flat rock to carry the word, and I never had to say it. The rock was covered. Mountain laurel, trailing arbutus, dogtooth violet, though the violets were long past bloom down below, which means somebody climbed for them, high, to the cold north ledges, where spring comes late, and in the middle of the flowers sat the mended lard bucket, lid on. Inside was a river stone, smooth and green, and wrapped around it was a strip of butcher paper in my brother's hand, and it read, "She knew before any of us. She always knew." The old man sat with me all night. "I'm all right, sissy. Go home and sleep." I sat down in the flowers on that rock, and I stayed a good while anyhow, and the knocking came once from up the drawer, soft as knuckles on a bedroom door, checking on me, and I knocked the stone twice against the rock to answer, and that is how my family mourns now, in 2 languages. Grief shared across a species line is grief halved, and I'd defy any preacher in this state to tell me different. The years after Mama settled into a rhythm I can only call a life, strange to every soul on earth but us, and ordinary as bread to us. I went up in April and October always, and stray times between when the pull got strong. Arvil knew by then. I'd told him the whole of it, the winter after Mama's first meeting, because a marriage can absorb one lie, but not a standing one, and my husband heard me out at the kitchen table for 2 hours, quiet, and then this lineman, this pole-climbing, pickup driving, dead-level practical man, sat back and allowed that it explained a good deal, including where the good half of every cookie batch went, and asked me one question, which was whether Toby was happy, and when I answered yes, he nodded and allowed then we're all right, and that was the entire fuss my husband ever made. He's walked to the overhang bench with me a dozen times since. Him and Toby trade tools and tricks. My brother has the finest hand forged. No, I'll say it right. The finest cold-ground knife blades in that county, because a lineman knows salvage steel, and the old man calls Arvil, near as Toby can render it, the quiet bull, which Arvil takes as the compliment it is. I think sometimes about the odds of it, that a secret this size found the 2 or 3 hearts in the county built to hold it without cracking, and then I think that's backward. The mountain did the finding. It always had. It found old Hobart before any of us were born. May came into it at 19, and on her own steam, which is the only door there is. She'd grown up on the official story, same as the county, uncle lost to the flood, and then one October she followed me. Followed her own mother up a mountain like a game warden after a poacher, because she'd been keeping books on my absences for years. And I came up over the lip of the slot, and there she stood on the bench below the overhang, arms crossed, and behind me on the trail, having tracked us both the whole climb, without either of us catching one sound of him, stood her uncle, grinning like Christmas morning. I'll leave the next hour to your imagining, except to report that May Kogar, who screamed at spiders her whole girlhood, took to the truth of that mountain quicker than any of us, being of a generation that had already made room in itself, for the world being stranger than the teachers let on. She's 43 now, keeps the April trip herself some years, and brother, who has a young one of his own these days, will bring the little one to the ridge above the bench to watch her pass, because the little one finds May's red coat the finest sight on the mountain, and the day my daughter learned that, she bought 2 more red coats, and wears no other color up there since. You'll want to know how they've fared, and how a family like that stays hid in a state crossed with gas roads and timber leases and trail cameras on half the beaches in the county, and the answer is the answer Hobart gave me the beginning, arrangement, only now I'm inside it looking out. The cove was never the whole of their country. It was the heart of a range that runs the high spine for miles, all of it steep, most of it public, the worst of it so laurel-choked that survey crews bid jobs around it. They move with the mast and the seasons. They knew every camera within their range inside a week of its hanging. Toby says they can smell the batteries, and I believe him, and what they can't root around, they school the young ones past at 3 in the morning in the rain. Twice in 25 years it got close. A helicopter with a heat camera worked the drainage 2 nights running in 2009, and the family lay those nights in the deep rock, under the cliffs, where the stone holds the day's heat and muddles the picture, which they knew to do before any of us could have told them. And in 2013, a seismic survey crew staked a line straight at the slot, and that one I killed myself, at a public meeting in Webster Springs, on karst and water table testimony I'd spent 2 winters learning to give. And the line moved a mile north, and nobody at that meeting ever guessed what that mile was for. My brother is 51 years old now. I want to set him in front of you as he stands today, because the boy vanished in the flood is the picture the county keeps, and it starves the truth. He is lean and grey-bearded and weathered to rawhide, scarred and crooked-fingered, and he is the single most contented human being I have ever been in a room with. If a 40-acre cove counts as a room, and it does, it's his front room, and I've eaten Sunday dinner in it, trout and ramps and hickory nuts, more Aprils than I can say. He reads, I've packed him a library up that draw 1 rucksack at a time for 2 decades, and he winters on it, and he'll meet you at the overhang wanting to argue about what he wintered on. He grieves, some. He'd not deny it. He missed his own life, the trucks and the girls and the schooling that coffee can over the stove was filling up for, and there are evenings, he told me once, when the lights of Bergoo come out below the ridge and he sits above them a while before he turns for home. But sorrow visits my brother. It doesn't board with him. And when it visits, the old man knows before Toby does, and finds work for the 2 of them at the weir. There's always work at a weir, and by dark, the 2 of them come up the apron shoulder to shoulder, and whatever was riding my brother has been left out in the creek. The worst scare we ever had came in the winter of 2007, and it's the debt I can never level. February, deep snow, and I hadn't planned to go up till April, and on a Sunday evening there came a knocking at my own back door, 2 soft raps, and I opened it on nothing but dark yard and falling snow, and then I looked down, and there were tracks, the tracks, coming out of the tree line to my porch and back, and laid on the mat was a hemlock sprig and a strip of butcher paper with 3 words in a shaky hand. Sick, come, hurry. To this day it stops my breath. The old man crossing 11 miles of settled country in the dark, past dogs and yard lights and deer rifles, to fetch a doctor's sister for his boy, and knocking the code we'd built on a rock, at a human door he had every reason on earth to fear. I was on the mountain by 2 in the morning, with all the all-night pharmacy in Somersville would sell me, Arville driving, and at the flat rock, a shape stood waiting in the snow, like a chimney against the stars, and I followed the old man up that black slot on his heels, hand on the cliff wall, and found my brother in the shelter burning with pneumonia, the whole family bedded round him like a wall against the cold. 10 days I went up and down that mountain, dosing him with what a nurse friend guessed me through on a story about Arville's chest, and the female never left his shoulder the whole time, and the old man met me at the rock every night to carry my pack up the ice. Toby turned the corner on the 11th morning, and when the fever broke, the sound that went up out of that cove, all 4 voices together in the grey daylight, I'd call it a hymn, and I'd be right. And I stood in the snow and cried like a child and sang along in whatever language the heart defaults to. Because that's the sum I keep arriving at, after a 1/4 century of carrying it. My brother wasn't lost, and he wasn't kept. He was raised. What my father would have finished teaching him, the old man finished in another tongue. Patience, provision, how a strong thing owes gentleness, how you stand between the weather and your own. I have watched the old man cross the cove in a January wind to tuck boughs over a seng patch my brother planted. Not because the family eats seng, because Toby tends it, and what Toby tends, the old man shelters. I've watched brother's little one ride my brother's shoulders down the creek, shouting the 2 falling notes at the jays. I have stood at the overhang at dusk and watched the whole family come down the apron together to see me off. 5 of them, and my brother, easy in a row against the last light, and any fear I ever owned of what lives in this state's deep hollows, died of embarrassment years ago. The old ones on that mountain have buried nobody's children. They've raised one of ours. The old man is failing now. I say it careful, because Toby holds by what the family holds by, that their kind ends the body, but not the household, that the young carry the old, the last mile, the same as the old once carried the young the first. But he is slower crossing the cove these last 2 autumns, and whiter, and this April he sat on the sunny apron most of my visit, with his back against the warm cliff. And Toby stayed near him all day, with a stillness I recognized, the stillness of a son keeping company. And when I came to leave, he did what he has never once done in 24 years. He walked me down. Past the overhang, past the bench, all the long slot to the flat rock at the bottom, my brother on one side of me and that great silver mountain of a soul on the other, ducking hemlock limbs, taking the wet stone easy, and at the rock he stopped, and he looked at me, the old weighing look, longer than ever before, and then he reached out one finger and touched the bill of my red cap, Toby's cap. I've worn it up that drawer a quarter century, the same soap bubble touch as the first day. Settling accounts, I think now, walking the far fence line of his life, while his legs would still carry him. I pressed my hand flat over my heart, the manner my mother taught us all. He pressed his over his. Then my brother and the old man went back up the mountain together, slow, matching each other step for step, and I stood at the flat rock and watched them out of sight, and I'd give a year of my own to unknow what that walk down was for. So now you have it, all of it, or all of it that's mine to give. I'm 58 years old, and I've spent this whole telling with Toby's blessing and the family's, delivered how their blessings come. Because last October, on the flat rock, on the anniversary, the old man left me a gift with his own hand, the first in all these years, that was for me alone. A river stone, green, smooth, twin to the one that came down the mountain when Mama died, and beside it, a sprig of hemlock, laid crossways, and Toby sat with me on the rock and read it for me, though I'd half learned the alphabet myself by then. The stone means kept, the crossed green sprig means and passed on. Keep it and pass it on. They know they can't be secret forever, my brother says. The world crowds up the hollows a road at a time, and the day is coming, maybe not in his life, when their kind will need the world to have already heard, from somebody with no photograph to sell and nothing to prove, that they are a people, and gentle, and old on this land, beyond all our deeds and surveys, and that the right answer to finding one is the answer a scared 15-year-old was owed and given. Carry it home, keep it warm, ask nothing back. So I've told it, with the names bent and the drawers renamed, and every word of the heart of it true. Tomorrow is the 2nd Saturday of October. I'll bake tonight, molasses, my mother's recipe, the card in her hand still taped inside the cupboard door, and before daylight, I'll put on a red cap gone soft as flannel, and I'll walk up the hollow my brother walked up 37 years ago, and somewhere past the overhang, they'll be knocking, 2 soft raps, and I'll answer with 2 of my own. Save him some supper, he told me. It took me 12 years, but I have never once stopped setting his place. And if you drive that county some evening and you see the dark ridges stacked against the last light, I'd ask you to think kindly of what walks them, because up one of those hollows, past a rock no map admits to, my little brother is sitting down to supper with his other family, safe as houses, loved past all telling, and the mountain that everybody swore took him has been handing him back to me, one visit at a time, for 25 years. Believe it or don't, Belief is a door each heart opens from the inside. That's my story. Every family's got a lost one. Ours got found. And better than found, ours got kept.